Good evening and welcome to the very first of the Untamed Book Clubs. As I sort of expected, we're not at the stage yet where we have had a lot of sign-ups because we are on a rolling out program of our community for Untamed. I'm just going to take this little opportunity to introduce myself and to give you a little bit of a background about Untamed, and then I'm going to talk about this month's book and talk you through the process of what book club will be like moving forward when hopefully more of you are able to join us. So you'll have to forgive me because this is my very first kind of live video and putting myself out there. So if you are feeling anxious about attending the next book club, be assured that you're not alone in terms of confidence levels and taking that step to put ourselves out into the community can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. So I am Kate and I am the founder of Untamed Apothecary. And Untamed Apothecary started back in COVID times when I began to spend a lot of time in nature and reconnect with a lot of my childhood syncretic pagan Christian roots and folkcraft and folklore. And having moved out to California, I was probably feeling quite homesick and nostalgic for some of those English countryside experiences and childhood memories, especially with having the situation where my family couldn't come over to California and there was travel was banned for such a long time. So I started making small nature-based personal power objects, you might call them, or totems, or meditation focused ideas. And I began to increasingly return to some of my younger explorations of what it is to connect to nature and to be a child of nature. I have practiced some form of earth-based spirituality since my teenage years, and that was kind of actively encouraged in our family unit, despite also being raised Methodist chapel. Methodism in England is a little bit less puritanical, perhaps, than it is here in America. So there wasn't such a disconnect between what's seen as kind of alternative spirituality and the church. I think that's to do with the very long history that England has with syncretic faith systems and the relationship between the church and pagan communities, which for nearly 2,000 years now in the British Isles has been some kind of uneasy friend, to say the least. So what this book club is about, it's informal, it's a chat. Hopefully with more of us join, the idea is that we'll get participation from you. If that idea scares you a little bit, I do have for each of the monthly book groups, we have a downloadable sheet, guided reading sheet for the Untamed Book Club. And you will see that it's just a few little prompt questions that you can jot down some notes. And then as you feel fit, you feel more confident as you attend more of these things and realize that nobody's going to eat you or bite you, that you can contribute your ideas. And you can just jot down ideas such as like how certain sections align with your current path, practices and ideas you'd like to explore further, challenges to your established view and natural world, society or spiritual path, and then specific rituals and exercises that you'd like to try. Now, one of the things at this book group is I haven't read the book in most cases before I bring it to the Untamed Book Club. So I am reading it and it's revealing itself to me in the same kind of time frame that it is to you. So just because the book has been put on the book club for reading doesn't mean it's like an endorsement from me or that I have prior checked it to see if it aligns specifically with my particular spiritual path and my kind of politics around my path. So this month's was this book here called The Green Witchcraft, and it's by Paige Vanderbeck, and it's one that seems to crop up an awful lot on kind of searches for beginners. And I've had it on my to-buy list for a little while, and it's seen a perfect opportunity to engage with it. I've actually seen it in my local bookshop, and I just really liked the formatting of it. I thought some of the illustrations were just chaos is already ensuing. Just thought some of the illustrations were just really aesthetically pleasing, and the layout was really aesthetically pleasing. It's just full of like very consumable points, ideas. And there was a lot about this book that I liked, and there were a few problems that I had with this book. So it would be really fascinating if you want to join in the conversation at some point, maybe via Instagram or on like comments attached to the video when I post it, as to what your thoughts were. So the book club here is a chance for us just to hang out, to explore different texts, share ideas. I'm going to say it is an absolutely imperative that we all follow the most basic of human ethics, and that is that we're kind to each other. There will be many different pathways, and the beauty of earth spirituality or alternative spirituality, new age spirituality, or witchcraft, if that's how you define yourself, is that the whole point of it is it's an individual, independent pathway towards your own spiritual relationship. And we are going to deal with some of the perhaps wider social political issues in spiritual practice, but at the same time, it's always done with grace and kindness and an understanding that we are all at different parts of our education journey, and that as much as we need to give grace to one another, we need to give grace to to ourselves. One of the things that I really loved about this book was that she talks about how we can connect nature to the everyday spaces that we inhabit. There is very much an idea that's been particularly perpetrated by TikTok that and social media, that in order to kind of live this earth connectedness, this kind of more pagan spirituality, you somehow have to go and live in a cottage in the woods and be that whole crone. Now, that is personally one of my dreams, but at the same time, the realities of life are that I live in suburban Los Angeles because, husband and children and all the dynamics that you have to make compromises when you're in relationships. So I have to forge my path from a very suburban setting. And I really love the fact that Paige Vanderbeck also talks about the fact that she discovered and grew up with the joy of nature in a suburban backdrop, that she was not from some kind of fairy tale background. I loved the fact that she kind of grounds a lot of her talk about nature in the realities of what we actually get to experience on a day-to-day basis. And if some of you are here live this evening, I'd be sort of stopping this book point now to ask you, how do you personally connect with nature where you live? Do you have parks? Do you have small gardens? Do you have community gardens, allotments? Do you have a balcony? Do you have any kind of space at work that has maybe like a lunch garden, for example? Because it can become really interesting that we feed our own narrative that we can't, because we can't do something on a big scale, it's not worth doing at all. And what I did like about this book was that she really explains that you can do this even within your apartment, that you can create a space where you can acknowledge that you are a creature of nature and that we are all part of an ecosystem. What I'd like you to really reflect on is almost like an audit of like, how currently do you connect with the nature around you? And is it satisfying? Could you develop that more? Is it an energy thing? Is it a resource thing? And how can you bring more nature into your daily life? So one of the ways that she suggests is that about creating sacred spaces within the home. And if anybody is like me, who has a complete and utter like kind of geological mineral and rocks and pretty stones thing going on, nearly every one of my surfaces in my house has somehow ended up being developed into some form of altar. She talks about how, the simple act of bringing in a pot plant and sticking a piece of earth around it, crystal or some other elemental force, is immediately elevating your environmental connection. That it's just a little reminder of the idea of organic nature. She talks about like how, especially if you are in a situation where maybe you can't practice openly, where you are needing to be more discreet, or for example, if you spend a lot of your time at work in an office space, in an office cubicle, and obviously you don't want to maybe have that engagement with your colleagues about this, you can create these like green altars around you, which, most people will just assume is a passing pot plant fetish. But I loved that. I loved the idea that, that what you surround yourself by, you can write a narrative about that, um, and create a sense of the sacred around it, because that's an internal thing that you project onto those items. So again, if you were here, I'd be asking you, to share your altar spaces and how you incorporate nature into those altar spaces. For me personally, I love filling my altars with um, pottery, like clay, handcrafted pottery for receptacles. I love, I'm a very sensory person. So for me, things like cotton and silk and hemp fabrics are very important. My actual altars, quite a few of my desks are actually made from like raw wood that we've actually had sanded down and put into tables, because being a Taurian, I like to feel a good sense of earth energy around me. And as I said, please do share in the comments or the feedback kind of some of your setups. If you want to post photographs, I'll work out a way to do that, because all this technology is a bit new to me. Um, she talks about how vital it is for human beings to feel grounded in their spaces. And I think that particularly when we're so surrounded by synthetic capitalism, that it can be really easy on a day-to-day basis to kind of deprioritize that. I liked the fact that she talked about things like barefoot walking, and she talked about the idea of forest bathing. And I love the idea that she was like, just something as simple as taking your shoes off and feeling a sense of stability underneath your feet, as if the earth is holding you, was powerful. Whether that's even on, even if that's on concrete, the idea that the earth is spinning beneath you, and that regardless of that, she always holds you. She's holding you steady, and she's giving you that sense, of gravity and security. Um, there's so many ways that you can ground, and a lot of the stuff that I was doing with Untamed Apothecary was about creating tools for grounding, just to bring you into that moment, to bring you into the idea of being present in your space, or the sensation of cold stone, or the warmth of wood, or that tactility, and how that can help just make you, just even for a second, step out of your busy head and go back to something that's much simpler in our roots. So I would love you to share with me how you found that section on grounding, and whether you felt that the advice in this book could resonate with your daily life, and whether or not you felt that that was something that she could develop more of, or that you feel that she gave some really practical advice for that. And I'd also like to share how you do your own energy and grounding work during the course of the day, especially like in situations where, the full on, between the school run and going to work and paying the bills and doing the grocery shopping and doing the laundry. How do you specifically stop and pause and give that practice to yourself? Now, when it comes to some of the issues I have with this book, it has got quite a heavy Wiccan leaning, and I personally am not a subscriber to the Wiccan path. For me, it just wasn't something that I grew up with. So I kind of already grew up with a framework outside of Wicca. Wicca for me was very much something that kind of was although it isn't, but for me as a growing up child, it was an American import that came through a lot of media kind of representation of what Wicca was. And, a lot of the iconography, and some of the Hollywood versions of it, in certain like, horror films and series like Charmed and Practical Magic, etc. Wicca is an incredibly useful set of rules and ideas for those that are exploring and starting. And for example, one of those is the Wheel of the Year. Now, the Wheel of the Year is as I grow through my practice, I have a relationship with the Wheel of the Year in terms of it does help me focus on the various points of seasonality. I'm aware that it's a construct, it's a modern neo-pagan construct. The Wheel of the Year is not ancient. It is not um, kind of something that came through from our great, great, great ancestors. It is a reworking of agricultural patterns. And having been brought up in the countryside, I was brought up in rural Lincolnshire and rural Gloucestershire, where the two families were. For me, that makes sense. You know, that we have the four seasons, there are four quarters to the year. So, in that respect, the Wheel of the Year really works for me. And it does provide a framework for some of her ideas about connecting with nature. I would say that for me, my main concern with this book, and perhaps why I wouldn't necessarily say I endorse it as such, although it's a good place to start with a pinch of salt, is that there is still a leaning towards cultural appropriation in here, which is unfortunately one of the issues I have with Wicca. Um, there is a talk about how we can sort of acclimatize to other people's cultures when we move. I think that was the section that I found particularly problematic around sort of page 13 when she talked about how our own magic is impacted by the environment around us. True. But it's also impacted by the other cultures and other cultural systems around us. And that for me, having moved from the British Isles to California with such a rich indigenous culture, sure, I have immense respect for Indigenous culture, and I've worked alongside a most amazing Indigenous women, and I have a deep curiosity and interest in their spiritual systems, but they're still not mine just because I live here in California. And I also don't have access rights to, this is my personal point of view. Some of you may differ on this, but I don't feel like, I don't feel I've got the right just because I live in California to go along and pick native white sage for my own practice because it's not something I've brought with me. And that to me is continuing a colonizer settler mentality. However, I will say it's not as straightforward or black and white as TikTok might like to make you think sometimes. Cultural appreciation is very different to cultural appropriation. Cultural exchange is a beautiful thing. And I do wonder if perhaps that's more what she's trying to get at in this book, but it kind of just feels like out of step with some of the growth we've all had in the community because of own voices and the diversification of the spiritual community voices through social media. I wonder if that might be something she amends in future editions of this book. Um, I would ask you, and one of the key questions I have here for you is that did any parts of this for you feel less inclusive or problematic? And how do you navigate that cultural respect in your own practice? And have you changed in that way? Because, for example, for me, doing anthropology and ethnic studies at the local college with Indigenous professors really brought home to me both how sometimes Western spirituality kind of literally steals from other cultures, but how in doing that, we're actually missing reconnecting with our own incredible, rich spiritual background and our own roots. It's like we're trying to look for somebody else's roots to nourish us when we really have our own roots that need replanting and regrowing. So I would love to know how you feel about that because I think it is perhaps one of the most divisive things we have in our spiritual community. And I think it's one of the most important things we need to focus on to heal as our communities and ourselves and our people. I watched an amazing TikTok today. It's on my TikTok page. I stitched it so you can go and follow the original content creator who talks about how, particularly in white spirituality, we are nursing a wound of disconnect from our roots and how that has projected outwards into a kind of violent legacy. And I was like, wow, I was blown away. I thought this is like one of the most erudite discussions on why it's so important for us to get back to our roots. Um, if we were all here together, I'd be asking you to share some of your favorite rituals. I know for me, one of the ones that I really loved was the rainbow radical self-love ritual in here. And I loved the idea where she was very much like taking such a classic symbolic image of like the of like a bedspread scattered in petals of rose petals, and how we associate that with being romanced by a partner, by others. But I love the fact that actually she said, like, this is for you, for yourself, that you actually treat yourself like your own romantic partner. And I think that's something that's really empowering and interesting. And it's something that I've been doing a lot of work on in the apothecary, with this idea of radical self-love. And we so often will give such an amount of energy and emotion and love to somebody else, and we don't even give ourselves often a fraction of that back. And I think that that was, for me, a jarring, in a good way, a jarring reminder to sometimes romance myself and to create a sense of value around myself. So I'd love to know which particular rituals, references, and ideas that you loved, and maybe also what practical tools that you liked. What I do love about this book is how we have lists, like really clear, like with her very like index led. So like, the natural element and then the correspondences and the kind of spiritual alignments, which again, you're invited to kind of feel or not feel, depending on like your own histories. So I liked the clarity of that. And I liked the fact that when she does talk about spells and rituals, they're really doable. It's like you have a clear outline of kind of like what the intention is, what the objective is, and then a list of ingredients. And it reminds me like very much like a recipe or cookbook in that respect. And I liked that. It's like sometimes magical work is an awful lot of energy to conceptualize. And for sure, it's very important for me to spend some time each month doing that kind of work. But sometimes I just want a kind of a quick fix. And this kind of offers a lot of quick fixes. I kind of like that. It's like there's a kind of like recipe books where, it's quick 20-minute meals when you get home from work. But I kind of felt how that was. All right. So I'm going to wrap this up now because you've probably heard enough of me talking. This would normally be a 40-minute session because I'd love to, like, we'd be backwards and forwards saying, you'd be telling me about your interpretations, your readings. Hopefully you'd be politely and respectfully pushing back on some of my ideas. And that's how good discourse works, how good kind of conversation works. We don't have to agree in order to just be civil. We can be civil in disagreement too. And that's a very important thing for us moving forward. I'm going to work out how I'm going to post. I think I'll post each last month's book club in the new newsletter because 4 weeks comes around quite quickly. And I'd like to say thank you for staying with me this evening and watching this video as I navigate all the technology. I'm not entirely sure even if I'm recording. I think I'm recording this. I'm not recording it, and that's kind of been a waste of half an hour then, really, as I was talking to myself. But then there's not much change there. So hopefully I've worked out how to do the Zoom now. Next month, we'll see a few faces here and we can work out how all that works in terms of chats and participation. And several of you now should have had the icon on your second or third newsletter, which is great. So you're starting to work out how all of this works. And thank you for being here at the very beginnings, at the very seed planting of this broader community and the thing that I'm trying to build here. You're really appreciated. So next month's book is, I believe it's Braiding Sweetgrass. Now, heads up, I have actually read that one. I just wanted to bring that to the group because I think probably quite a few of you have read it independently, but I just thought it'd be really nice to get together and have a chat about it. I think it's a really beautiful invitation for us to appreciate somebody else's spiritual earth systems and for us to learn from that in a way that we can apply to our own practice, especially for those of us who are trying to plant back our roots and to regrow our roots through revitalization and reclamation, which is a really complicated journey. And I think in Braiding Sweetgrass, she offers us some really beautiful pointers to finding grace and developing our own personal pathway with nature. So please join me. It's always the penultimate Thursday of the month. It's always at 7 o'clock, unless I suddenly get a whole raft of East Coast folks that want to be here earlier. And you will find the Zoom link for the book club on the website. If you've not signed up to the monthly micro e-zine, I really encourage you to do that. It's hopefully a delightful little 10-minute read in the garden for you, or in your lovely natural space, maybe the park or on your balcony. It basically covers aspects of seasonal folk craft, seasonal folklore, recipes and rituals, as well as a kind of a bingo sheet to inspire you to do some more grounded and meditative practice and some more self-love practice. And that's about it. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for putting up with my very first shambolic faced camera thing. And I'll hopefully see you next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.